The metal floor of the Dominion warship, Righteous Fury, felt cold beneath Captain James Miller's knees. He kept his head high, even as the alien guards forced the other 49 human prisoners to kneel in a straight line along the massive hangar bay. The emergency lights cast everything in a deep red glow, making the scene look like something from an old nightmare. High Marshal Drake walked slowly along the line of prisoners, his tall, armored form towering over the kneeling humans. The four-fingered hand of the alien commander held a ceremonial staff, which he used to tap each prisoner's shoulder as he passed them. The soft clicking of his boots echoed through the otherwise silent hangar. "Your species," Drake's voice boomed through his translator, "refuses to understand its place in the galaxy." He stopped behind Miller, placing the staff against the back of the captain's neck. "Perhaps this lesson will make things clearer." Miller felt a drop of sweat roll down his temple, but his voice remained steady. "We understand perfectly well what you are, what you're about to do." The guards moved with practiced efficiency, placing neural restraints on each prisoner. To Miller's right, he could see Private Thompson trembling slightly. The young soldier couldn't have been more than 20 Earth years old. Miller wished he could tell him to be brave, but any movement now would only make things worse. "Your understanding is irrelevant," Drake said, moving to stand in front of the prisoners. He gestured to the dozen recording drones hovering in the air. "This transmission is being broadcast to every human colony, every outpost, every military installation. They will all witness the price of defiance." Miller looked directly into the nearest drone, knowing his next words would be his last. He could see his reflection in its lens, his gray-streaked hair matted with blood, his uniform torn and dirty, but his eyes still sharp and defiant. He thought of his family back on Earth, of his crew who had died fighting, of all the sacrifices that had led to this moment. "Record this clearly," Miller spoke loudly, making sure his voice would carry. "What you're about to do isn't an execution. It's a mistake. You think killing us will break humanity's spirit." He laughed, the sound echoing off the hangar walls. "You just signed your own death warrant." High Marshal Drake raised his staff. "Your species' arrogance ends today. Let this serve as a lesson to all humans who dare to resist the Dominion." He brought the staff down sharply. The neural restraints activated simultaneously. Miller felt the burning sensation begin at the base of his skull. He kept his eyes open, staring directly at Drake as the pain increased. Around him, he could hear the muffled groans of his fellow prisoners as the devices did their work. Private Thompson's voice cracked in a half-whisper. "Mom, I'm sore." The words cut off as the restraints reached full power. Miller's last conscious thought was of Earth's blue skies and a silent prayer that his death would mean something. High Marshal Drake watched impassively as the bodies slumped forward. The recording drones captured everything. The final twitches, the last breaths, the absolute stillness that followed. He turned to his second-in-command, Commander Voss, who stood quietly at attention. "Send the recording to all human territories," Drake ordered. "Add it to the broadcasts from the other ships. 200 human prisoners, executed according to Dominion law. That should make our position clear." Commander Voss hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Sir," the human captain's last words were nothing but empty bravado. Drake cut him off. "Humans always talk big, even in defeat. Have the bodies disposed of in space. Let their people see them drift as a reminder of their helplessness." As the cleanup crews moved in, Drake strode from the hangar, already focusing on his next task. He had a war to win, after all, and this was just another step toward victory. Behind him, the bodies of Captain James Miller and his fellow prisoners were being prepared for their final journey into the void. None of the Dominion crew noticed that the recording drones had captured something unusual in their final moments. The slight smile on Captain Miller's face, a smile that suggested he knew something they didn't. Admiral Robert Anderson stood motionless in Earth's Central Command as the broadcast ended. The massive screen before him faded to black, but the image of his old friend James Miller's final moments remained burned in his mind. Around him, the command center had fallen into a heavy silence broken only by the soft beeping of monitoring equipment. "Play it again," he ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. The young lieutenant at the communications station hesitated before replaying the transmission. This time, Anderson watched without blinking, his hands gripped behind his back, so tightly his knuckles turned white. Colonel Hayes approached carefully, holding a data tablet. "Sir, we're receiving similar broadcasts from other Dominion vessels. Current count stands at..." He paused, swallowing hard. 212 confirmed executions of human prisoners of war. Anderson finally turned from the screen, his weathered face set like stone. "Location of the broadcasts. Spread across 7 different sectors, sir. They wanted maximum visibility." Hayes pulled up a star map showing red dots where each execution had taken place. The Righteous Fury was just one of many ships that carried out the orders. The Admiral walked to the central tactical table, its holographic display showing the current position of Earth's fleets. Around him, the command staff waited in tense silence, watching their leader process the information. They had all served with him long enough to know that his quiet anger was far more dangerous than any shouted rage. "Get me the Security Council," Anderson said finally, "and contact every fleet commander. Priority Alpha." As the staff rushed to comply, a new alert flashed across the main screen. Intelligence Officer Martin stepped forward, her face pale. "Sir, we're getting reports from the frontier colonies. The Dominion, they didn't just broadcast the executions. They're ejecting the bodies into space near populated areas, making sure we can see them." Anderson's jaw tightened. He remembered teaching at the academy with James, sharing drinks after graduation ceremonies, watching good officers grow under their guidance. Now his friend's body was being used as a prop in the Dominion's twisted display of power. The main screen flickered to life again, showing the faces of Earth's Security Council members. Their expressions ranged from shock to barely contained fury. "Ladies and gentlemen," Anderson addressed them, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him. "You've all seen the broadcasts. You know what the Dominion has done. I'm requesting an immediate emergency session." Council Chairman Roberts leaned forward. "What are you proposing, Admiral?" "A change in our entire military doctrine." Anderson pulled up the footage of Miller's last words. Captain Miller was right. This wasn't just an execution. It was a mistake, one the Dominion needs to understand fully. The tactical display shifted, showing the full extent of human territory and military assets. Anderson began marking points on the map as he spoke. "I want all restrictions lifted. No more conventional engagement protocols. No more accepting surrenders. No more prisoners of our own." "You're talking about total war," Councilwoman Turner said quietly. "I'm talking about justice." Anderson's eyes hardened. "They didn't just kill soldiers today. They killed any chance of mercy. I want every fleet mobilized, every reserve activated, and I want a new standing order issued to all human forces." He played Miller's execution one final time, freezing on his friend's defiant smile. "From this moment forward, we fight like we have nothing left to lose, because after what they've done, winning isn't enough anymore." The council members exchanged looks before Chairman Roberts spoke again. "You have full authorization, Admiral. Make them regret this day." Anderson nodded once, then turned to his staff. "Send the order to all commands. Operation Reckoning begins now." He looked back at Miller's frozen image. "They wanted to break us. Instead, they just removed every reason we had to show restraint." Commander Voss stood at his post on the bridge of the Righteous Fury, watching the battle unfold through the main viewport. Something had changed in the way the humans fought. Where once they followed predictable military doctrine, now their ships moved with reckless abandon, ignoring damage, refusing to retreat. "Sir," his tactical officer called out, "human vessel approaching on attack vector. They're not responding to our warnings." Voss leaned forward, studying the smaller ship's approach. Standard procedure: target their engines and prepare boarding parties. But sir, the tactical officer's voice shook slightly. Scans show they've removed their life support systems. They've stripped everything out to make room for explosives. Before Voss could respond, the human ship slammed into one of their escort vessels. The explosion tore through space, turning both ships into a cloud of superheated debris. No distress calls, no attempts to evacuate, just complete, total commitment to destruction. In another sector, Dominion General Krell watched in growing concern as reports flooded in from across the front lines. His aide compiled the latest intelligence on a datapad. Every human soldier we've encountered in the past week has carried a personal explosive device, the aide reported. They activate them the moment capture seems likely. We've lost 17 boarding parties this way. Krell rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building. What about their fleet movements? Surely they must be protecting their supply lines, their colonies. That's just it, sir. They've abandoned conventional defense strategies. Every human ship we encounter fights to total destruction. No retreats, no surrenders. Our casualties have increased by 300%. On the frontier world of New Haven, a Dominion patrol moved carefully through the ruins of what had been a human settlement. Captain Mers led his troops forward, weapons ready. The humans had evacuated the colony days ago, but something felt wrong. Contact, one of his soldiers shouted. A single human figure appeared at the end of the street, wearing civilian clothes. Mers raised his weapon. Halt! Surrender immediately. The human smiled, the same kind of smile they'd seen on that prisoner broadcast, and pressed something in their hand. The entire street erupted in flames as hidden explosives detonated in sequence. Mers's last conscious thought was realizing this had been a trap all along. Back on Earth, Admiral Anderson reviewed the latest battle reports. His aide, Lieutenant Reed, highlighted key points from the field. The Psychological Warfare Division has analyzed the change in combat behavior, Reed explained. They say the executions triggered something unprecedented. Every human soldier knows what happened to those POWs. They've all seen the broadcasts. Now they're making sure the same thing can't happen to them. Anderson nodded slowly. And the Dominion's response? They're struggling to adapt. Their whole strategy relied on us following conventional warfare rules. Now, Reed pulled up a tactical display. 6 of their capital ships have gone dark in the past week. Complete disappearances. No distress calls, no debris fields. Just gone. The ghost ships, Anderson said quietly, remembering the new special operations teams they'd authorized. Each one crewed entirely by soldiers who'd lost friends or family in the executions. A message flashed across the main screen. Another Dominion supply convoy had vanished near the Arcturus sector. The pattern was becoming clear. Human forces weren't just fighting anymore. They were hunting. Sir, Reed hesitated. Some of our own officers are concerned about the psychological toll this is taking on our forces. Anderson turned to the window, looking out at the stars. The Dominion wanted to break our spirit, he said softly. Instead, they broke the chains of conventional warfare. Every human out there knows what happens if they're captured now. And they've chosen to make sure that capturing them costs more than the enemy can pay. The Admiral's console beeped. Another report of a Dominion ship going silent. They were learning, step by step, the true cost of their mistake. The Dominion supply ship Resource Bearer drifted silently through the darkness of space. Its captain, 3rd Marshal Wells, stood on the bridge reviewing security protocols for the 4th time that day. 3 similar vessels had vanished along this route in the past month. He wasn't going to let his ship become number 4. Another sensor sweep, he ordered. Check for any. The lights went out. Emergency power failed to activate. In the total darkness, Wells heard the soft hiss of atmosphere venting somewhere behind him. Report, he shouted. No response came from his crew. Instead, a new sound filled the bridge. The heavy thud of magnetic boots on metal deck plates. A faint blue light suddenly illuminated the space, coming from the visors of environmental suits, human environmental suits. The leader of the boarding party stepped forward. Their suit was marked with a simple symbol, a skull wearing a prisoner's neural restraint. Wells recognized it as the emblem of the mysterious ghost ships that had been terrorizing Dominion space. "Please," Wells raised his hands, "we're just a supply vessel. We carry food, medical supplies, and neural restraints." The human's voice came through their suit's speaker, "like the ones you use to execute our people." They held up a familiar-looking device. "We found a whole crate of them in your cargo hold." Miles away on the bridge of the ghost ship remembered. Commander Peters watched the operation through the boarding team's cameras. Her vessel, like all ghost ships, was running dark. No lights, minimal power emissions, special coding absorbing sensor scans. They were shadows, hunting shadows. Team 2 reports the engine room is secured. Her tactical officer reported. All crew accounted for and contained. Peters nodded. "Begin the transfer. Everything of value goes to our holds. Then we'll do what we always do." The operation took less than an hour. When it was done, the resource bearers' crew found themselves packed into their own escape pods, watching their ship break apart under precise explosives. As the pods drifted, waiting for rescue, they could just make out the words painted on the ghost ship's hull before it vanished into the darkness. "Remember the POWs." In his command center, High Marshal Drake reviewed the latest logistics reports with growing concern. Supply lines were being cut faster than they could be rerouted. Every convoy needed heavy escort, tripling the cost of basic operations. 50 ships lost in the past month alone. "The colony on Nexus Prime is requesting additional security forces," his aide reported. "They say they've detected ghost ship activity in their sector." Drake slammed his fist on the table. "Those damned humans. How are they doing this? Our sensors can't track them. Our ships can't fight what they can't see. And every time we send out a patrol, it disappears." "Sir," the aide hesitated, "there's more. Our psychological warfare division has completed their analysis of the ghost ship crews. Well, they're all connected to the POW executions. Family members, friends, former squad mates. They've turned their grief into a weapon. Each ghost ship specifically targets locations and ships connected to the executions." Drake's blood ran cold as he remembered Captain Miller's last words. On his screen, another alert flashed. 3 more supply ships had gone dark near the Arcturus sector. The aide continued. "Our economists estimate that maintaining our current territories will become impossible within 6 months if this continues. The cost of protecting our supply lines alone is—" "I know the costs." Drake snapped. He stared at the growing list of lost ships and territories. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were systematically bleeding the Dominion dry. Every raid, every disappeared ship, every destroyed base carried the same message. This was the price of their mistake. In the darkness of space, more ghost ships waited, their crews patient and determined. They had nothing left to lose, nothing left to fear. They had become the very thing the Dominion had created, an enemy that could not be bargained with, could not be deterred, and would never, ever surrender. High Marshal Drake's flagship, the Righteous Fury, shuddered as another explosion rocked its hull. Red emergency lights flashed throughout the massive vessel as damage reports flooded in from all sectors. The bridge crew worked frantically at their stations, trying to maintain control of their dying ship. Multiple hull breaches on decks 3 through 7. Commander Voss shouted over the chaos. "We've lost power to the main weapons array. Shield generators are failing." Drake gripped his command chair as another blast shook the ship. "How many enemy vessels? Where are they attacking from?" "That's just it, sir," Voss's voice cracked with stress. "We can only detect 3 ghost ships, but our sensors show attack patterns from at least 8 different vectors. They're using some kind of sensor reflection technology. We can't tell which signatures are real." The massive view screen showed brief glimpses of human vessels appearing and disappearing in the darkness of space, striking with precision before vanishing again. Each attack targeted critical systems, systematically crippling the once mighty flagship. "Sir," a junior officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission. It's being broadcast on all frequencies." Drake nodded grimly. "Put it through." The screen flickered to life, showing a human officer wearing the now familiar skull emblem of the ghost ships. "Hi, Marshal Drake." The human's voice was cold, emotionless. "Do you recognize this location?" The camera panned out, showing the space around them. Drake felt his blood freeze. They were in the exact coordinates where he had ordered the execution of Captain Miller and his crew. "You brought us right where you wanted us," Drake realized aloud. "Every retreat, every chase. You were hurting us here." "The same coordinates where you murdered our people," the human confirmed. "Every ghost ship in this battle has someone who lost family or friends to your executions. We've been waiting for this moment." Another explosion rocked the ship. Voss checked his readings, his face pale. "Sir, they're not trying to destroy us. They're boarding us." Multiple breach points on all decks. Through the ship's internal cameras, Drake watched in horror as human boarding parties moved through the corridors with deadly efficiency. They wore the same type of neural restraints that had been used in the executions, but modified into weapons. "Security teams report the humans aren't taking prisoners," Voss reported quietly. "They're using our own neural restraint technology against our crews." Drake slammed his fist on his command console. "This is impossible. We are the Dominion. We cannot be defeated by—" "By what?" The human on the screen interrupted. "By the families of the people you murdered. By soldiers who watched their friends die in those broadcasts. You didn't just kill prisoners that day, Marshal Drake. You killed any chance of mercy." The bridge doors exploded inward. Human soldiers poured through the smoke, their weapons trained on the Dominion crew. Drake noticed each soldier wore a small hologram projector showing the face of one of the executed POWs. The leader of the boarding party stepped forward, removing their helmet. It was a woman with steel gray hair and familiar eyes that matched those of Captain Miller. "I'm Colonel Miller," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of personal vengeance. "James Miller was my brother. And this," she gestured to the chaos around them, "this is just the beginning of what your mistake is going to cost you." As neural restraint cuffs were placed on his wrists, Drake finally understood. The humans hadn't been fighting a war. They'd been orchestrating a reckoning. And now, in the same place where he had ordered those executions, he was about to learn firsthand the price of his decisions. The last thing Drake saw before the neural restraints activated was Colonel Miller's smile, the same defiant smile her brother had shown in his final moments. The Dominion War Council chamber had never felt so tense. 12 high-ranking military leaders sat around the massive black table, watching the footage of their flagship's capture for the third time. The image of High Marshal Drake in neural restraint cuffs had been broadcasting across every Dominion world for the past week. Supreme Commander Thane, the highest-ranking military officer left in the Dominion, switched off the display. "Our position has become untenable," he stated flatly. "In the months since Drake's capture, we've lost contact with 30% of our outer colonies." "The humans aren't just winning," General Krell added, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "They're dismantling us piece by piece. Every ship we lose joins their ghost fleet. Every base we abandon becomes their forward operating position." At the far end of the table, Admiral Voss, recently promoted after surviving the flagship's capture, pulled up new data on the central display. "Our military spending has tripled just trying to protect our supply lines. 3 major colony worlds are threatening to declare independence rather than face human retaliation." "And what of the prisoner?" someone asked. Voss's expression darkened. "High Marshal Drake is being held aboard the human vessel Justice Served. They've been broadcasting his trial across both human and Dominion space. They're making sure everyone sees it." The display switched to live footage from Drake's trial. The former High Marshal sat in a simple chair, still wearing the neural restraint collar. Before him stood Colonel Miller, presenting evidence of the POW executions. "You turned grieving families into weapons," Colonel Miller's voice rang through the council chamber. "Every ghost ship captain lost someone to your executions. The commander who captured your flagship, his son was on your prison transport. The admiral leading the campaign against your colonies, her sister was among the first victims." Drake's response was barely audible. "We were following standard Dominion protocols for dealing with resistance. And how has that worked out for you?" Miller's voice carried no emotion, just cold certainty. "Your own people are abandoning you. Your empire is crumbling. All because you thought killing prisoners would break us. Instead, it gave us nothing left to lose." Supreme Commander Thane muted the transmission. "We need to sue for peace," he announced. "The humans have rejected our last 3 attempts at negotiation." But the chamber's doors burst open. A junior officer rushed in, face pale. "Sirs, the human ghost fleet. They've just appeared in the Dominion home system. Hundreds of ships, more than we've ever seen gathered in one place." The council chamber erupted in chaos. Thane slammed his hand on the table for silence. "How did they get past our defenses?" "That's just it, sir," the officer swallowed hard. "Our own defense fleet. They're powering down their weapons. Some ships are actively joining the humans. They're saying they won't support the government that ordered the executions." Voss stood slowly. "Then it's over. The policy that was meant to break human resistance has instead broken our own people's will to fight." On the main screen, Colonel Miller continued addressing the court. Behind her, a massive window showed hundreds of ghost ships moving into position around the Dominion capital world. Each ship's hull bore the names and faces of the executed POWs, a silent testament to the price of Drake's decision. "Your empire dies not with a bang," Miller told Drake, "but with the whispers of your own people saying enough. They've seen what happens when you cross lines that should never be crossed. Now they're choosing survival over loyalty to a regime that couldn't understand one simple truth. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you create yourself." As the council watched their capital being surrounded, they finally understood the true cost of their mistake. It wasn't measured in ships or territories lost, but in how they had transformed an enemy they could fight into one they could never hope to defeat. 1 year after the fall of the Dominion capital, Earth's largest space station hosted a ceremony unlike any in human history. The massive observation deck had been transformed into a memorial hall, its curved windows offering a view of the stars where so many had lost their lives. Admiral Anderson stood at the podium, his dress uniform adorned with the new Ghost Fleet insignia, a neural restraint transformed into a symbol of remembrance. Before him, thousands of holographic panels floated in the air, each displaying the face of an executed POW. "We gather here today," Anderson began, his voice carrying across the silent chamber, "not to celebrate victory, but to remember why we fought. Each face you see represents not just a life lost, but a lesson written in blood, that cruelty creates its own punishment." In the front row, Colonel Miller sat next to her brother's hologram. Captain James Miller's defiant smile looked out over the assembly, no longer a symbol of defeat, but of the strength that had emerged from tragedy. High Marshal Drake sat in a special section, still wearing his neural restraint collar. As part of his sentence, he was required to attend every memorial ceremony, to witness the consequences of his actions. The once proud military leader now looked broken, aged decades in just 1 year. "The Dominion thought they could break our spirit," Anderson continued. "Instead, they forged it into something unbreakable. Every ghost ship captain, every vengeful family member, every soldier who carried on. They transformed grief into purpose, loss into strength." The station's external lights illuminated hundreds of ghost ships floating in formation outside. Their black hulls, once instruments of revenge, had been repurposed. Each now carried the name of a POW, serving as mobile memorials and peacekeepers. Today, Anderson's voice grew stronger, We ratify the Galactic Convention on Prisoner Rights. Representatives from 50 species have signed, including the New Dominion Democratic Council. The law will bear the names of our lost comrades, ensuring their sacrifice prevents future atrocities. Commander Voss, now representing the reformed Dominion government, stood to address the assembly. We learned the hardest way possible that brutality breeds only greater brutality. The cost of our mistake wasn't measured in ships or territories lost. It was measured in how it transformed our enemy into an unstoppable force of justice. A new hologram appeared above the podium, the text of the Miller-Anderson Convention, named after the captain whose execution had sparked the change and the admiral who had guided humanity's response. Its first line read, "No prisoner of war shall ever again face execution, for the cost of such actions transcends all calculation." Colonel Miller approached the podium, carrying a small box. Inside lay a deactivated neural restraint collar, the same one used on her brother. She placed it in a transparent case, where it would remain as a permanent reminder. "The Ghost Fleet's mission is changing," she announced. "Our ships will no longer hunt for revenge, but guard against the very actions that necessitated our existence. We will be the Watchers, ensuring no species ever again mistakes cruelty for strength." As the ceremony concluded, Admiral Anderson looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the last of the old Dominion hardliners were still hiding, but they no longer inspired fear. They had learned, as all would learn, that some lines could never be crossed without devastating consequences. The ghost ships began their departure, their dark hulls catching the light of distant suns. They had been born from humanity's darkest moment, but would serve as guardians of a better future. On their sides, the names of the fallen still shone, no longer calling for vengeance, but standing as eternal witnesses to the cost of killing those who had surrendered their weapons, but never their dignity. Humanity had paid a terrible price for this lesson. Now they would ensure it never needed to be taught again.